But first, was Britain better under Labour? Let's ask that question. 0207 862 2222. Give us your answer. A Snap poll by YouGov found that 75% of Brits feel things in the UK are worse now than they were in 2010. Only 7% said the country had actually got better in the last decade, with 18% either saying it's about the same or they didn't know. And this brings to mind a brilliant song.
And now on Top of the Pops, the Smiths, who are at number 10, they're into the 10, and heaven knows I'm miserable now.
So are we more miserable now? That's the question. And it's an excuse anyway to hear this brilliant Smith song.
I was happy in the haze of a drunken hour, but heaven knows I'm miserable now. I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now.
All right, freeze there. The person who said we're sadder under this government raises this question. Has this government made us, let's say, more miserable than the last one did? The person who said it, Tory MP here, a guy called Danny Kruger, weirdly the son of Prue Leith, the cook. And he says we've left the country sadder. Now, how on earth do we quantify that? We've got this poll we're talking about. It's very awkward. It's very awkward because he's in the party that's been running us. Let's put down two columns here. Let's have this column, the red column, Blair Brown. That government ended in 2010. And then the blue column, the governments that picked up Cameron, May, Johnson, Sunak, and there's a vegetable. Oh, yes, the lettuce. So that's Liz Truss. So Cameron, May, Johnson, Sunak ends maybe 2024. In the debit column, this is just my jottings. 2 wars and a major banking crisis for Labour mean that some people will have got quite sad during that period of the Labour government. On the other hand, Brexit chaos and COVID for the Conservatives, you could put against them in their column. You might say on the economy, Labour's problem was overspending and the Conservatives underspending. But these are just my jottings. It's not for me to tell you whether you're happy or sadder now than you were in 2010. I don't know, Anne, what do you think?
Well, I think if you were around when the Smiths brought out Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, by definition, you're a certain age. And as you get towards, let's call it midlife, you tend to be a bit glummer. But I think there is a serious point here that the great financial crisis, 2007, 2008, it was a terrible shock to the system. All those debates about what you should spend and how you were going to access money to do all good things, take societies forward, really took a big hit. And I don't think we appreciated it at the time. And I thought I was covering political economy at the time, but even so, how long that tail would be. So the sort of misery factor for me is something that took root then, and I think governments have struggled with ever since. And you could say a very long period of Conservative rule that followed it. You know, they did inherit that, but in many ways they had been an erratic.
Oh, so we could say that the Conservatives have been dealing with misery caused by Labour and the banking crisis, Kevin.
There's some truth in that. There's a long tail to that financial collapse, global financial collapse in
Might have caused Brexit, some people say.
7 and 8, yeah. And I found much to complain about in 2010, but I can see why a majority of people, or most people now, feel sadder, because I think in many ways we've gone backwards, individually and as a country. Look at the NHS. 2010, you had waiting lists, a fraction of what they are now, and huge patient satisfaction. That doesn't exist now. Wages haven't recovered to their value of 2008 yet. Some things have improved. Literacy's improved in schools. Kids read and write better. So it's not all doom and gloom. Everything the governments have done since 2010 have not been wrong, but I think austerity was a huge mistake. Cutting back investment in public services. And Brexit itself, it's not solely to blame. COVID was terrible, but Brexit unleashed divisions and poison that I think whichever side of the argument you were on, whether you were for staying or leaving, I think we now accept it was just an awful. It was an awful period.
It's not even over. It's not. It seems like it might be the next 20 years. Yeah. Just talking about was it a mistake? I've got a little board here. I can put on my easel, and just to, not that we're oversimplifying, but since 2010, are you happier or sadder? In other words, is Danny Kruger right to say this government, his government, has made him sadder? I'm thinking you might be in this column, Kevin. You might just be.
So, yes,
You're
Fabian,
sadder
look,
now.
You want permanent progress. You want each generation to do better than the one before and to be happier. That isn't the case.
And Anne, you're thinking that you may. Oh, I don't know where you'd be because, as you rightly point out, as one gets older, one gets sadder anyway.
I don't want to be like the miserable person here. I do think that what we're lacking is a clear sense of going forward. So I think we're lacking optimism, but I would also say, we have had we've seen a lot of progress in the last years, that people will think, hey, that's not actually in my life. But if you look at global inequalities are probably arguably less than they were because the poorer world is catching up with middle income countries. People will say, well, what's that got to do with me? But if I take, and it's sort of my job to do it, take a bit of a global view, I do actually think that we're heading into a very difficult point now in the world, but I am not going to join the sadder column. I'm going to say more optimism column.
All right, and I'm suddenly struggling to think you're without an E.
My name is Anne, and I'm on your show, and it's got an E on it.
I know. I got into terrible trouble with Widdicombe because she doesn't have an E.
I'm not Anne Widdicombe.
No, I put an E on Anne Widdicombe because...
Turn the engine off, get out of the cab and walk away from the JCB because you are digging yourself in.
I suddenly it's the E in Anne has caused the problem. For years. It's not just McElvoy, it's everybody. Right, OK, Shelley. Hello, in Newcastle.
Hello.
Now, Shelley, are you with an E or not?
No, Shelley.
All right, how are you doing?
All right, thank you.
Let's look back to 2010 first, right? 2010, banking crisis, everything in upheaval. Are you happier now than you were then? Or are you
I don't know,
Shelley?
really. I think I'm just in between.
Oh, you can't be in between. Shelley without an E. That's where you are.
Can I just say, everybody seems more miserable since COVID. I've just noticed everybody, they've had to put up with COVID.
Yeah.
We're having to fork out to help with Ukraine, paying for Ukraine. And now this war in Israel, it's going to, the thing with the boats is worrying because it could put up prices and everything even more and infect inflation. I mean, a lot of it's out the government's control, really, and Europe's doing bad. I watched a programme, Spain's got nowhere to live because people are buying their house.
I'm moving you into the sadder. You've got sadder after you started talking. You started quite happy, and then you got... OK, you're going in the sadder column. Thank you, Shelley. Chris, where are you, Chris? Manchester, how are you doing?
I'm in Manchester, yes, thank you.
All right, OK.
Have I got to make a choice? Because
yes, you do.
Talk about Hobson's choice. Well, I'm going to say happier, but...
Really? OK, happier now. All right.
Well, yeah, but can I caveat that?
Yes, you can caveat it. Yeah.
I just said to your producer...
Researcher, yeah.
Researcher, sorry.
Producer.
I think there's so many people like me who feel politically homeless. This is a choice of certainly the best of a bad bunch. Until we get major political change in this country, and it probably won't happen in my lifetime.
What do you mean? Not having elections, or what sort of change do you want?
No. Sorry, not just a two-party system.
Right.
And I do believe that coalitions have a place. So you might end up with 4 or 5 different political parties.
Really?
In the government. Yes, I do.
You want that chaos?
Sorry?
You want that chaos?
Well, who says it's going to be chaos?
Well, it was pretty chaotic in the first...
Now.
Exactly, Chris.
Yeah.
We've got chaos with a first-past-the-post system, an unfair system, I agree.
Proportional representation all day and every day for me.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Jeremy, this is why you've forced me to make a decision.
I have, and you've done brilliantly to go happier, but you don't sound very happy, to be honest.
well, no, I'm not. But as I say, you gave me no choice, really. But just one stat for you. Under David Cameron, when he came into power, our national debt was £1 trillion. Now it's 2.5 trillion. Now that equates to our GDP. That is a frightening statistic.
Oh, for sure it is. I mean, and of course, you're against austerity, are you, or you're in favour of it?
Well, I'm not against it.
People who complain about the debt always then say they're against austerity, which was cutting spending. So I can never quite understand it.
Well, to answer your question, austerity isn't a bad thing, but you've got to then, there's only 2 ways a government can raise any revenue: through taxation or through borrowing. We've got to stop the borrowing thing. Now, the taxation thing, give people more incentive to invest in this country to grow the economy.
OK, Chris, brilliant. Thank you. You've given a great explanation. Thanks so much. We'll take some more calls after the break and hear a bit more from our panel as well. Was Britain better under Labour? Now your calls. Was Britain better under Labour? You can see here, this is Danny Kruger MP here on our screen, and he's the one who said, we've left the country sadder. Is he right? We can talk to, let's just see who's on the phone, Sylvia in County Durham. I think you're going to say you're sadder now, Sylvia, are you?
Well, the thing is, Jeremy, you see, I have a policy for the people who are less fortunate than most of us. And the simple fact is, under Labour, we were happier because we didn't have food banks. We didn't have the elderly going cold and being frightened to put their heating on. We didn't have the people who are on benefits, i.e. people who have mental or physical disabilities, who are being ripped apart. We didn't have a National Health Service who were letting people die because they couldn't cope. So do I think Britain was happier under Labour?
Well, and I'm thinking this,
100%.
you might query this that particularly optimistic description of the Labour years.
Well, I do. Yeah, I'm not saying it. All of these things that Sylvia describes are facts, but the trouble is if you went around most developed countries or rich world countries and said, were you better off at that point? Mainly the answer would be yes. So a question I might put back to Sylvia is, if it's to do with being Labour, sorry, I'm probably looking the wrong way.
Yes, good.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Hi, Sylvia. If it's to do with Labour, are you then confident that voting Labour would begin to correct all of those things? Or do you actually think some of them are beyond the control of governments and we just go through cycles, partly economic, partly social, of sort of happiness and unhappiness, and we happen to be hitting a particularly difficult
What do you think, Sylvia?
Well, I think if Labour gets in it in this next election, I think they're going to have a very, very difficult job on putting this country back to where it was. Because I think Conservatives have ripped the heart out of this country. Do I think that Labour's going to do a better job? I don't know, because they're not in yet. I hope to do a better job. I hope mostly the elderly people and children, I hope they can start and live a life instead of worrying about whether their mums can feed them, whether they can put their heating on to keep warm. So do I think Labour's going to do a better job? I don't know, but I do hope so.
OK, thank you very much, Sylvia in County Durham. Sid on Twitter says, now we are overtaxed and underpaid. With the Conservatives, it's always been a race to the bottom. I've lost faith in the political system. So Sid definitely goes here. We're struggling to find people who felt
going there.
Well, yeah, it's let's see, the happy column's not going well. Sam on Twitter says, I think people old enough to remember the 80s know Labour won't do any better. Have you asked Gen Z, the most entitled bunch since records began? Oh, shade thrown, as they say.
I remember the 80s, and I thought they were terrible. Unemployment topping 3 million, social unrest, the miners' strike. I'm sorry, state assets being sold off at cut prices to friends of the government. Oh, it was a terrible period.
The Thatcher decade. It's his special subject, the Thatcher decade.
Yeah.
Being very cross about it. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because Labour, at the end of Labour, the floorboards just went with the economy. And the Conservatives would say, well, they've had to sort of bail it out, and then they had COVID, it wasn't their fault, and so on.
But the global financial collapse was no more Labour's fault than Putin invading Ukraine and COVID is the Tories' fault. Yes, it is. How could Labour control...
lack of regulation.
How could Labour control what was happening in US banks?
Well, they spent based on the phantom receipts of corporate... balance sheets.
Northern Rock from the northeast, with several callers from the northeast. I always thought was a rock solid institution.
I never understand this idea where you say, or anyone says, oh, the government was in charge, but it wasn't their fault.
No.
If you're the government, everything's your fault.
Well,
no, it happens on your watch.
You don't think so?
No, the global financial crisis was just a massive storm set off by lack of proper regulation.
How did Australia swerve it then?
But every country was involved in it. I can find a bit of fault with the way that Gordon Brown. I wasn't particularly a fan of Gordon Brown.
He's agreed with you.
Way of looking at
we're actually agreeing.
But we just had rubbish regulation.
Look. Look, I'd have had tighter regulation.
Nobody ever knows in advance how to regulate. There's not some guardian angel that can come down and show you what to do in the banking
You could trace it back to the Thatcher era in the 1980s.
Maybe you
Big
could.
Bang
Big
and
Bang.
deregulation of the city.
Yeah, maybe you could.
But the Labour government's response...
It would be a much poorer country if you hadn't deregulated the city.
Alistair,
so what you're always saying in this debate... Sorry, I'll just let Kevin come back.
No, because you're right.
Right, if you hadn't... all that and your little misery count of the 80s, and, much of it is true. There's another side to the 80s. So that you can almost sort of see it in the music and the culture of the 80s, which was that go-getting, slightly, yes, let rip, take out a lot of regulation that was holding the country back. So the more modern economy, which actually did then benefit Labour when it came in, was created at the back, and that's why they didn't really undo the Thatcherite settlement.
A lot of the music and culture and fantastic TV, like Boys from the Black stuff or Wiedersehen, was all against what was happening. It was a counterculture.
I suppose what the thing, going on the other side of the debate, which is kind of my job, we do feel now that going back to the Smiths, we're just miserable now. And the banking crisis was very, very bad, and we can argue about whether it's Labour's fault. But somehow there's a deeper level of misery now, isn't there?
There's a deeper level of anxiety and worry, and that is justified.
And that's Israel, Ukraine, COVID.
By the global situation.
That's global as well. So all the stuff that goes wrong isn't the fault of our government. That's where we're getting to now.
During the 80s, we lived under the threat of nuclear war. With far more nuclear warheads. So it's always the world's always been uncertain.
In real time and happily, the nuclear threat was, and it was hanging over you, and different people have different sort of anxiety levels, but I don't think it's the same as actually, watching the devastation. Remember, I worked in Russia and Ukraine, and I see places that I know bombed to smithereens, and I know that people that I knew are dead or missing or in the Russian system in prison, and that so there's a if you like a slightly more globalised vision. Just a counter question: if we keep asking ourselves how miserable we are, do you think a little bit of slightly getting a feedback loop here? And if you put on "Don't Worry, Be Happy," that really irritating song, there's just sometimes you do. This is not to do anything that we've talked about.
No, you're right.
You need to put on a good. Sort of possibly not the Smiths.
You may be right.
The Jam, walls come tumbling down.
Chumbawamba or something.
But
we need to cheer
why we're discussing it though? Because we've got an election, and Danny Kruger, Freddie Kruger for the Conservatives, is saying right. That's it. We've had it.
He's a bit of a maverick, and he has his own views, and he's actually his own politics a bit to the right of where the government is now. So the fact he's been cited a bit by the left of centre is a bit like, that's weird, because I think you wouldn't like what Danny Kruger wants.
I don't quite get what he's up to, but then there's a whole group called the New Conservatives who
there's a whole group called everything, isn't
jockeying, and maybe Liz Truss ends up as their leader, or Nigel Farage.
Let's cheer everyone up.
Let's see.
They've got the 5 families, those mafiosa type groups.
Brilliant.
She's going to form a 6th.
All right, thank you for your calls. We got some names in the happier column, but it's very unscientific, but we do seem to be sadder. Maybe, as Anne says, it's because we're all a bit older.